The recent rise of fake news, rumors, and conspiracy theories are posing a challenge to American democracy. Different parts of society are believing different facts about the world, obscuring the truth and pulling the nation apart. What is the history of fake news and conspiracy theories? What are the consequences, and what do we do to stop them? This is Snack Break. I'm Aroop Mukharji, and today we're pleased to have an expert on the topic, Kelly Greenhill, professor and director of the International Relations Program at Tufts University and a research fellow at the Belfer Center at the Harvard Kennedy School. She's been finishing up her next book called Fear and Present Danger, Extra-Factual Sources of Threat Conception and Proliferation. We'll see if she can tell us where that Malaysian Airlines flight is. Kelly, thank you so much for being here.
Delighted to be here.
No, but actually, though, where is it? Do you know where is it? I mean, I think about that thing at least once a month.
I could tell you, but then I have to kill you.
Oh, man. So why do these mysteries, these things, like the Malaysian flight, like JFK, why do they capture our curiosity so much? Why are they so popular?
Well, I would say a couple things. So first, not all of these stories or ideas or conspiracy theories, what I call extra-factual information writ large, will appeal to everyone. So at the same time, for any given story or piece of EFI, there's an audience. And to answer your question, they appeal to us because humans don't like uncertainty. And they are eager to find ways to make sense of troubling, unsettling events.
But those are, some of these things are mysteries. You mentioned uncertainty, but some of these things are provable, like Trump's inauguration crowd and the fake news around, whether, how big it was, and he said it was huge, and you can just look at the pictures and make that determination. What makes some people believe one fact over the other?
There are three factors that are highly influential in determining whether or not someone will view something as plausible or true. And I should just step back for a moment to say, since you talked about some of the more, should we say, outlandish conspiracy theories starting there, it's going to appeal to maybe different audiences. But if we're talking about something more prosaic, like the size of inaugural crowds, curiously, the same three factors come into play, but we're talking about very different audiences. So the three things that matter in terms of affecting people's likelihood of viewing something as plausibly true or true is worldview. So number one, does the information on offer nestle neatly and nicely within what they already believe about the way the world works and the knowledge that they already have or think they have about the world?
So like if somebody with Trump's, it would be somebody who already believes or Trump is or should be popular.
Yes.
So they would be more likely to believe that they had a larger crowd.
And or their political leanings put them in a Trump camp, or as they've now called themselves Trumpian. Okay. So if one is a firm, fast Trumpian, they will be more likely to express the opinion that his crowd was larger, even if faced with disconfirming evidence. Second factor that matters a great deal is, how salient is the issue? How concerned am I about the information or the issues related to the information on offer or related issues? In the context of security-related EFI, we're talking about threat perception. So how concerned, fearful am I, or anxiety-ridden am I about X issue? That can be in the context of personal physical security, which tends to move the needle more than economic security, but there's some evidence that economic security related issues can also influence whether or not people are more likely to believe something, believe a piece of EFI. I should say, though, that worldview and threat perception, or worldview and salience, can cut in different directions. So one might encounter a piece of information that like, yeah, that sounds plausible or true to me, but I'm not really worried about it. Or that sounds pretty bogus to me, but I'm actually quite concerned about it.
And the things that make them worried about it, you said economic insecurity, other sorts of things, salience, this idea of salience. I mean, that's also media. I mean, if it's something that's very, if it's graphic, for instance, if there's fire, if there's death, if there's suffering of some sort, human suffering, those are things that would make it more.
Well, that taps into another piece of it, which is, sort of, does it capture our emotion? So, irrespective of whether we find something personally salient. We can be emotionally drawn in. There too, though, these factors can be additive or they can cut in different directions. The third factor that matters a lot is whether or not one has heard the piece of information before, or something in the same family of information or family
Somebody else has
before.
told them, or it's been confirmed by another
or
source.
They've heard it on the media.
So
even if one knows something's false or is skeptical about it the first time they hear it, the way our brains work, once it's in there, the consequence of what we call the fluency effect, it's more readily accessible, and so our brains say, oh, that's more likely to be true.
So this makes the whole echo chamber of Facebook really disastrous, because if you're getting all this information and it's being circulated and shared between your friends, then you're hearing these things over and over, and then you'll start to actually believe them more.
Yes, even if you were initially skeptical. Or at least there's a tendency there. If one starts out really skeptical of something, you might remain skeptical. If one starts off on the other end of the spectrum, what I call sort of disciples as opposed to the atheists, then you're already a true believer and you're unlikely to be moved. The key audience is those who are sitting on the fence, the swing voters, if you will. They're open to the idea that a piece of information may or may not be true, and the more they hear it, the more likely it is that they'll be triggered to believe that it could be true.
Is there an equilibrium here, or can we just shift? And are there people who just won't believe certain things? Is there a threshold for people? Are we heading in a certain direction? I guess I'm curious. Do we settle somewhere?
It's content and context specific, and this goes back to, for any given person, there's a given piece of EFI that will appeal to them. So it's not that there are certain populations or certain people or certain cultural moments where folks are uniquely vulnerable and otherwise they're not. To quote Tom Rosenshield, who's director of the American Press Institute and a fellow at Brookings, misinformation is not like a plumbing problem that you fix. It's a social condition that has to be managed. And so we go through cycles. This is not going away. No, this isn't going away. I mean, it will become, we hope, less acute, as it has in the past, because this is not the first fake news crisis we've been through. But these things go in cycles, and we are dependent. We as people in this country, as well as elsewhere in the world, are more or less vulnerable depending on what else is going on in the world.
So this is not news. How long has it been going on? I study the 1890s, the early 1900s, and of course yellow journalism.
That was yesterday.
But so it's been going on much longer than 100 years.
Since the advent of human communication.
The Romans had fake news.
The Romans had fake news, yes.
And so what makes us shift from one cycle to another of having a fake news moment or a misinformation moment? Is it technology? Is it economic conditions? Is it, what makes that happen?
I don't think there's a universal answer to that, but on the upside, we do seem to self-correct. And in the past, there's been recognition that we've sort of gone too far. And on a couple of occasions, what we now think of as the mainstream media, or the fake news media, as certain people like to call it, have stepped in and essentially said, we will be the standard bearers for the truth and promoters of truth. So in the time period that you mentioned, 1898, we were in the midst of a fake news crisis in this country, and not simply because of William Randolph Hearst's newspapers, but more broadly, many newspapers around the country, and certain newspapers decided, no more. And so there were cases where newspapers put on their masthead, "We are combating fake news." Right? This is a venue where we present the truth as sort of a signal, and it became more appealing from a market perspective for people to buy into the truth, and market moved the needle. So other newspapers followed suit.
McCarthyism would be another example, right, where people just stand up and say, actually, we're done with this.
Well, it got a lot worse. Right. So we talk about now as we think about the mythology of Murrow, sort of standing up against McCarthy, but there were many McCarthy imitators for a while before we decided enough was enough. And it's worth noting that McCarthy happened at the time that we view as the heyday of mainstream journalism prevailing. So we have to be careful about romanticizing. It's never been perfect, but we go through cycles of crises and periods where we do a better job of policing the media ecosystem.
But have we reached that point? I mean, has the needle reached the point of us self-policing yet?
No.
So it's still getting worse before it'll get better. Is that your?
I predict that it'll get worse before it'll get better. Quite often, action isn't taken until things get really bad.
Really bad.
But also,
we already had the election manipulated.
Well,
I mean, what?
Yeah, but we're still dealing with we're still in the throes of figuring out
how to deal
with
so
that.
So
And exactly
2018
what
hasn't happened, and maybe something worse happens then.
So it's not, which isn't to say people aren't taking steps or taking this seriously, but anyone who turns on TV or logs onto the internet, we clearly haven't solved this problem, and there's still active debates about how to address the problem in the here and now. And by the by, there's not even agreement on what is the problem. The term fake news is in and of itself problematic because people can't agree on what is fake news. And I find it, to a certain extent, not a very helpful term anymore because it's been appropriated to more or less mean by certain parties anything I don't like. So that's one problem.
You would use conspiracy theories, rumors, misinformation, those sorts of terms.
So I use extra-factual information, which includes rumors, conspiracy theories, various forms of fake news, as well as a raft of other kinds of information that again are unverifiable unverified or unverifiable at the time of transmission using what are agreed secure standards of evidence.
Is soft news a risk here? I've read about this term where it's soft news. It's not just news that's soft. It's sounds like it, but actually it's news that is like Fox and Friends or shows that are entertainment based but are presented to the public as news shows. How do we self-police against that?
Well, in this environment, it's a little bit difficult because, so just to be clear, this is not a partisan issue, right? So soft news, no matter what one's political leanings are, soft news is a issue of particular concern given the way our brains work, and I can come back to that. But how do we police it? We effectively have two blunt instruments, and neither is a silver bullet, and I think that's encapsulated in the fact that I say blunt. But we have the potential to use regulation, which brings up a raft of concerns about the First Amendment and
free press
and all of those things. Regulation is not a panacea. It should give us pause, but if we're talking about the safety of our democracy and guaranteeing the protection of our institutions, it may be necessary. That being said, given our political history in this country and the current political climate, I think it's unlikely that regulations of the kind that might be necessary would originate in this country, but rather probably start within the European Union or a particular European country that spreads. The alternative is, of course, market mechanism. So if enough people decide to say, quote unquote, hashtag delete Facebook, then commercial interests may respond, but
or they just become more savvy about this stuff. It's almost like those listserv emails you got 20 years ago saying that if you forward this to a bunch of people, you'd win a prize, or all those sorts of things. And we've developed spam filters, or people can recognize spam more easily.
This happens every time there's a new transformative technology, whether it's from the printing press or the radio or television or the internet, and now with social media. People will get savvier, but it's a cat and mouse game. So those who want to persuade us will get savvier as well. So it's now possible to manipulate video. So we could, your producers could turn around and make me say whatever you wanted me to say.
Is that what do you think that's the next major problem that we have?
I think it's already here.
Really?
And there's commercially available software So you can do this if you'd like.
I mean, you can just imagine, how do you present evidence? You know, there's videos, not just, you think of police brutality, all these things that are in the news now. You could say, well, we've got video footage. Well, that sounds like that's no longer
it's not a guarantee,
good evidence.
If it ever was. So photos have been doctored for ages. There have been forgeries. So you're absolutely right to point out that if we put our thinking caps on and ask hard questions and rely on trusted sources, but also trust but verify, that'll take us some way along the path to dealing with this issue. So it's not that I'm saying we should throw our hands up and assume that we need to be just carried along on the wave of extra-factual information, but those who want to persuade us and sell us fill in the blank.
They'll figure out a way.
Yes, they'll figure out a way.
Well, something that's not fake news is how delicious chickpeas are. And
that is true. That is verifiable.
To segue into that, and you actually requested, or you said one of your favorite snacks is our homemade spicy chickpeas, and I took that, and you gave me the ability, an off-ramp, so to speak, to get store-bought chickpeas, which I did, but I also took it as a challenge to make my own spiced chickpeas. So we've got.
I'm in awe.
We're gonna do a little taste test. I thought, thank you so much. Why do I need Saffron Road to tell me what Bombay spice tastes like?
Right.
I could just make it myself.
That's true.
All right.
So you're going to switch them all around so that I don't know which one?
No. So now you know, of course, which one's which. So
yes.
I guess that's part of the problem. You study psychology, so now you have these preconceived notions about which one is.
But I could close my eyes and you could.
Okay, yeah.
Yes,
Why don't we?
okay.
All right. Well, so how do we do this? All right.
You can put one.
Oh yeah, I'll do. Okay, that sounds perfect. All right, I'm not going to tell you which ones.
And I won't look at the disparate colors.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yes. So I'll give you 3. Okay. That 3 is probably enough to get a sense of things. And I'm not going to say anything about which one is better or worse right now. Although I'm gonna.
Both good.
Okay.
The first one, I'm sure, was the store-bought Bombay spice.
That is right.
It has that quality of processed food. So I prefer the homemade.
Oh, great. One win for me.
You're my star.
All
yes.
right, good. Anytime. I want to return to something earlier, how people start believing this sort of misinformation. And you had an article, co-written article last year in International Studies Quarterly, ISQ as it's known, it was a study about what are the factors that make an individual believe something. And in it you said education and gender had nothing to do with it, or income. I mean, you tested a bunch of different factors. I thought if you have education, if you get smarter, that might be a way to recognize what is misinformation, what is wrong, what is kind of manipulative. But that's not the case.
But that goes back to, for any given piece of EFI, there's an audience. So if the person delivering the information is viewed as credible and the information is plausible, if you trust the source and it makes sense.
It's a human condition. It affects everybody.
It is a human condition.
It's remarkable.
And moreover, there's some evidence to suggest that more educated people might be more susceptible because they think that they're
that's horrible.
Capable.
That's not good for universities these days.
Yes.
And you're already in a bad spot.
Right. So again, not susceptible to everything, but we're all vulnerable, and we should recognize that. And I think one of the major disservices that I don't want to say, those who think that just putting the facts out there, this is a common myth, that just if we just got the right information in front of people, the rest would follow. And it's like, facts are critical. They're imperative. We can't do without them, but they're not enough.
Yeah.
We need to recognize that there are some things that
persuasion, marketing, all these sorts of things.
Yeah, marketers have known this for a very long time. They know how to press our buttons.
Why don't people question where they're getting all their information? Shouldn't awareness be something that prevents this sort of spread?
Well, you're right. If we take on the uncomfortable role of saying we should question everything, that can take us part of the way there. But human psychology interferes in a few critical ways. So number one, we naturally think that other people are susceptible, but we're not.
Oh.
Because we're smarter, particularly highly educated people.
Man.
So, yeah, other people may, this may be true for other people, but not for us. But also it is the case that people learn from fiction.
What?
Yes, they learn from fiction, but they think only other people learn from fiction.
Wait, fiction like novels, fiction
like novels, like films,
books,
like
or
movies,
films, or whatever,
yes.
anything.
Yes. So
What?
We learn from fiction, and we often leave our critical thinking skills at the door because we get emotionally sucked in. There's this phenomenon called transportation. So we sort of get drawn into the narrative, and it's pressing all of our emotional buttons. So we're imbibing all this information, and quickly, really quickly, it's like somewhere between 7 and 14 days, people forget where they learned things. So this is where the soft news piece that you mentioned before comes in. So things that we knew were explicitly fictional or knew were false on T0 or time 1, we pretty quickly don't lose sight of that.
This sounds really bad because you can't bridle fiction. You can't say, hey, stop writing things. People should be able to write and do and produce all these things, but they have this effect. They have this very negative.
But it can be harnessed in a positive way too, right? So we can affect societal views positively by using entertainment media. This tool the use of this tool has been understood for a very long time. In pre-World War I Britain, for instance, some segment of the army believed that the British Army was too small, the Expeditionary Force was too small, and they wrote white paper after white paper after white paper and appealed to the government to change policy. And it was like talking to a brick wall. So one former sapper at Sandhurst got the bright idea that he would instead write a novel. And he's like, he wrote to the editor of a popular periodical at the time, and he said, I think I need to speak to people emotionally. I need to find an alternative way to move the needle. And the result was, the first example of this was what is known as the Battle of Dorking, in which an unnamed invader manages to successfully take over the British Isles. And this story appeared serially in this periodical. It was reprinted 6 times as a self-standing novella, sold out each time, and then spawned an entire invasion literature genre. Even though those who read it and purchased it knew it was explicit fiction, it got cited in parliamentary debates that gave rise to the first peacetime maneuvers to sort of test whether or not the British Isles were vulnerable to invasion. The then Prince of Wales traveled around the country to tell people not to be worried about the invasion. This wasn't explicitly a novel. This wasn't even soft news or fiction masquerading as fact.
It was like, this is a novel. This is a book, enjoy it, and whatever.
Yes, but people became quite exercised. So it resulted in new legislation, changed public opinion, sold a lot of books too.
That is.
And
trying to just think about all the things that I've read in fiction that I would like to be true. Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka, that comes to mind. That could be good.
I don't know. It's unverified at this point, but it could be true.
It could be out there.
A quite consequential, it's anecdotal, but I think there's a fair amount of evidence to support it. Ronald Reagan was one of the 100 million plus Americans who watched the TV show, or I should say the miniseries, The Day After, in November of 1983. And biographers have reported that Reagan was left depressed and deeply affected by The Day After, which portrays nuclear holocaust, or what happens after a nuclear holocaust. And the kicker is that 4 years later, after the Intermediate Range Missile Treaty was signed, the director of The Day After got a telegram from the White House saying, don't think your movie didn't play any role in this, because it did. So that telegram was unnecessary, it was unsolicited, and it was 4 years after the miniseries.
Wow.
So that's at the top.
So all you artists out there,
yes,
you have a responsibility.
Yes. And one could argue that is a positive example of the influence of fiction on it. But fiction is another example of EFI.
Well, maybe it's best to end on that note.
More uplifting.
A little more uplifting than, oh boy, things are not looking good right now.
Indeed.
Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
This is Snack Break. I'm Aroop Mukharji, and today we had Professor Kelly Greenhill, Director of the International Relations Program at Tufts University and a Research Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. For more episodes, please visit our website at snackbreakshow.com.